Welcome back to On Listening. This is your host, Daniel Rosen. My next guest for On Listening is Kit Miller, director of the Gandhi Institute for Nonviolence in Rochester, New York. She's been the director there since 2009, and I am just pleased as punch to have her on the show.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for inviting me on for the time.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think the segue, I want listeners to know the mental segue of how I came to think about you is during recording one of the shows, I think it was my introduction, I thought about nonviolent communication and how that influenced me, helped me become a better listener. And so I did a few Google keystrokes away, and there's the Gandhi Institute, a little gem in Rochester, New York, and our director is available. Can you tell us a little bit about listening and what the Gandhi Institute does and why we might be interested in what you have to say about listening?
Sure. Well, my background actually before I worked at the Gandhi Institute was in engaging with the work of nonviolent communication. I served as the director celebrator of Bay Area Nonviolent Communication in Oakland, California for 5 years before taking my current position. And I got involved with the work many years ago when I started staying home with our youngest child who turned 27 earlier this month. And I started staying home then, and I was terrible at it.
Terrible at listening, you mean? Or terrible at raising a child?
Terrible at staying home, terrible at listening. I was a good product of my upbringing. I was really focused on outcomes and getting stuff done and achievement. And that really set me up for a lot of difficulty being home at that point with two little guys and then a school-age child. And listening to myself, first of all, listening to other people was just really wasn't in my skill set. I would say that I was an instrumental listener, which I listened when I had an end or an outcome in mind. I wasn't someone who knew how to just be with as much as I was, wanted to. I didn't know how to do it in a good way. I didn't know how to listen to myself. I didn't know how to listen to other people. So but I wanted to stay home with my kids if I could initially, because I had been a hospice volunteer at that point for a little while. And I always tell people, if you don't have a lot of time or money to do big work on yourself, become a hospice volunteer for 4 hours a week, because it's quite a transformative form of service. So from doing my hospice work with people from all walks of life, I really heard and saw that most people, when they were dying, they didn't die, wishing that they had, worked more or made more money or gotten more stuff. Most of them died wishing that they had done a better job taking care of their close relationships. So when I started staying home and I was bad at it, I thought, I didn't want to do harm to my family. And I had been raised in a house with some physical and verbal violence, and all that conditioning under the stress came roaring back in. I really thought, I should go back to work and make money and let my children be raised by a kinder, more gentler person than myself. And then my husband, gave me the gift of saying, you can learn, you can do better. I know you can. And that's when I ran across the work of nonviolent communication. That was before Marshall Rosenberg had written any books. And for some young people listening to this, it may be hard to understand, but this was before the internet was common. So it was a long row. And it's been the basis of a lot of my understanding of relationship work now comes out of that work on listening.
I love your pedigree there. My first thought listening to that is something that's so contrary to my training as a clinician and really as a human, as a 55-year-old at this time in 2020, that your expertise comes from having suffered. Your expertise comes from having been in a place of not knowing and feeling humble and feeling like you had a lot of work to do on yourself. And it's the antithesis of being an expert. And I was tempted to introduce you as an expert in our pre-show talk, and you were pretty clear. Hey, don't call me an expert. I'm a student. And this is the currency of a generation younger than us, I think, Kit. What's your lived experience? Where did you come from? How hard was it for you to get where you are? That's very contrary to the PhDs and medical degrees that I hear. Mm-hmm. Were the voices that I listened to when I was younger.
Yeah. Well, that's how we were trained to value certain voices and certain perspectives, weren't we?
We were, and sometimes they've misled us, but sometimes not. But so,
I would say that those voices didn't mean to mislead us. They just weren't sufficient. They just were incomplete. That we just need to hear more voices and more perspectives. And I think the voices and perspectives of people who are not served by systems, the ones who have been harmed even by systems, are the ones that I wasn't trained to hear or recognize or listen to. And they were the ones and are the ones now that often have the most to teach me.
Yes. I like the way you put that, to take it away from some hierarchical judgment of good and bad. And we're all struggling to get enough information to hear enough to make good choices.
Yeah.
Find relevance.
And now we have a new job, is also to be able to go through too much information and decide which of it we could trust and which of it really supports our understanding.
I'm going to take a guess here that you're going to, of course, correct me if I'm wrong or agree if I'm right, that you're talking a little bit about the influence of social media and fake news and even some of the news around. So right now, as we're recording, there's this pandemic of COVID-19 and how we discern what's relevant information and what's not relevant information. Yeah.
I mean, certainly social media has, and fake news, but even just in general, just the proliferation of human knowledge. And the availability of information on the web. It's a whole other world. For generations, students' jobs were to add to the body of knowledge. And now, a part of any student's job is also to discern what knowledge and which knowledge, because there's just so much information out there. And then all of that, obviously is accelerated, and the waters are muddied, if you will, by social media and the way that it's getting harder for people to know who to trust and which voices we want to listen to. And also it's easier for us to just find the voices that concur with ours and not challenge ourselves to listen to ideas that are different.
Yeah. Break the privilege bubble, break the silo of information. That can be tricky. Hey, so I want to talk about a little the concept of processing content. So you're talking about how there's too much content out there. And there's a process then of how we listen to that, how we discern. That's a sort of a skill to discern something. And this podcast is a little less focused on content, although we'll get there at some points. But mostly it's really about listening. And so learning how to listen, developing that skill, which you're saying you really didn't come innate to you. You had to develop it over the course of your training and life. What is there a lesson from nonviolent communication or your own experience that helps us be better able to discern that?
Oh yeah, many. I think one of the ones that most accounts for the fact that I'm happily being we're all staying at home right now, right, because of the illness. And I was laughing with my husband yesterday that I was happy to be doing that with him. in part because of the training that both of us received early on. That's been such an enabler of good relation between us, and coming up on 30 years together now. And I think for one of them, honestly, is that I heard Marshall Rosenberg say many years ago, and then I also saw again a couple of years ago in a book on social innovation by these two guys, Chip and Dan Heath. The book is called Switch. And both Marshall back in the day and these two gentlemen talk about the importance of when we're listening to someone and then when we want to respond to them, how useful it is to offer empathy before education, empathy before information. The Heaths say that giving someone information or education when they're really needing to be heard and understood, which is a certain kind of listening for me, is like throwing someone a fire extinguisher when they're drowning. It's a good tool, a wrong tool for the job. And all day long, whether I'm talking to one of the folks on my team, my 80-something-year-old parents who live downstairs from me right now, who have been home isolating for a couple of weeks now, really anybody, I'm always listening through the lens of nonviolent communication, which is listening for the human needs underneath whatever the expression is. What are the needs? And how can I support someone through that? I love that.
Yes, I remember. I think it's observations, feelings. Help me with the 4 main components of NVC.
An expression of an observation, the feelings in relation to the observation, which point to the needs in relationship to it, and then some kind of request at the end. Here, I'll give you an example. Dan, when you asked me Friday to be on the call, I felt really joyful and grateful for the opportunity. It meets my need to sit in my own home today and hopefully contribute to your listeners, and also to connect to you because your brother is someone who is very dear to me. And I'm wondering how all that is to hear.
Oh,
that's a classic framework of nonviolent communication there. And also 40 words or less is one of the other gifts from Marshall Rosenberg, that if you're going to speak, we're going to speak in small bites and then let the other person respond.
Well, I'm gonna try to practice that. That's very. I hear you. I think that's an observation, and it fills my heart with joy to hear you say that. I have a need to reach out to some of the people in Rochester that have a bit of a voice and that I have access to through my brother-in-law, Larry. And I'm so grateful you responded to my request in the affirmative. How'd I do?
No, nothing can be wrong here. It's all good.
Nothing can be wrong because Marshall Rosenberg talked about giraffe ears. Is that right?
Yeah. And it's the way I think about it is because I'm an old Star Trek girl. I think of Lieutenant Uhura on the bridge of the Star Trek. A sexist show in many ways, but still it's in there in my early days. And because she had to wear this little skirt,
yes,
all the time, which really bugs me. But she had this amazing little, thing in her ear, like they do in the UN General Assembly,
right,
where no matter what was being said, whether she was listening to Romulan or Vulcan or whatever language was on the Star Trek Enterprise being spoken, she could understand and translate for the rest of the crew what was happening. And for me, that's what nonviolent communication is like. It's like having one of those little things in my ear all the time. And you might be speaking Mandarin and I speak Portuguese, but we still understand one another. And I've even been able to experiment with it in other languages. I was at a conference I served on the board of the Center for Nonviolent Communication for some years, and was at a board meeting in Germany probably 15, 16 years ago. And a woman came into the room and she was very upset. And she was trying to explain something had happened in her family. And she was trying to explain in English and was getting frustrated. English was not her first language. And I said, would you just tell me in German? And so she just like went off in German for a couple of minutes, and I just listened to her. And so I didn't understand the words. I was listening for the emotional content. And I asked her afterwards, I said, did that feel useful? She said, it was so beautiful. I felt very free because it felt like you were following me and you didn't really care about the content. You cared about me.
Oh, well, that's sweet.
So I've done that at other times with people, just like let them speak in whatever language is the language of their first family or their home. And it's kind of a fun experiment.
Oh, that's beautiful. Really, oh my goodness. People talk about the nonverbals in communication, and so you get the free run of all the nonverbal by letting them verbalize in their native tongue. And oh, that just sounds delicious.
Yeah, give it a shot sometime. I'll be interested to hear what you think.
Thank you. You talked about, you used the word empathy earlier. You talked a little bit about empathy. And I think it fit snugly in somewhere as a tool I thought it was to sort of understand the needs of people, but you said throw empathy rather than education. How does that mesh in with listening, understanding people's needs and hearing their feelings?
Well, for me, it's listening is not like a performative effort. It's a following and accompanying effort. So I'm just there to listen and pay attention. I'm not consulting with a team of attorneys in my head, preparing my response when I'm listening to other people. And that's helpful for me now because I was, kind of educated to listen that way. I was only looking like I was listening. I was really preparing my response while someone else's mouth was moving. I mean, it's one of the great things that we learn to do as children, many of us, when we're yelled at by the giants in our life who are adults, to pay attention. It's a great act of resistance that we learn, that we can look like we're paying attention even when we're not. So almost every group I sit with these days, I will often say to them, I'm aware all of you right now can very easily look like you're paying attention, which is a form of courtesy to me that I appreciate, and not be paying attention. And sometimes you're not paying attention is for wonderful reasons, like you're exhausted, or your attention is drawn to the fact that you're hungry, or that you might have been stimulated by something I said and it caused your mind to kind of scamper off in its own way for a while. Whatever is true for you, I understand. And I just want to invite you to spend as much time as you can with me while we're together. So when your thoughts kind of drift away, which all of our thoughts do, just come on back as fast as you can. And, that's the truth, is that especially when we're listening to something that we find is challenging, it's not very easy for us to really listen. That team of attorneys that all of us carry around inside of our heads is busy preparing a very clever counter argument. It's hard to listen, especially when you don't agree. And that's one of my kind of tips sometimes when I'm working with groups. And this really has come from community work for many years, which is I find that when people are listening to someone and they don't agree with them, we cease to make the effort to understand them.
Oh, yes, I do. I do want to come back to that, but I'm going to go back a little bit. Let's make a little note of that when there's a disagreement. What I want to go back to is going to get a little recursive here. So I'm going to ask for your help because you are a very good talker, and you don't use the word a lot. You have a nice capacity to string your thoughts together. And so I found that I'm interested in several different points along the way as you're talking. And while I'm not building a counter argument, I'm making little mental bookmarks. And despite my best effort, I interrupted you because I had a question about empathy, and I didn't know what to do when you were kind of on a roll.
Uh-huh.
And I wasn't really thinking about what I'm going to say next as much as trying to remember the salient things, the important things that I wanted to come back to. So how should I do that?
Well, for one, thank you for the feedback. And it's good to hear that there were things that were kind of popping in your mind as I was speaking. I am a big fan of saying, hold up, I need to.
Right.
So I actually experience that as a form of courtesy, because it means the other person is really engaging with the content rather than just, as I said, either pretending to listen or waiting for me to shut up so it's their turn.
Yeah, it was something in between. I wasn't waiting for you to shut up. I mean, sometimes I'm listening, waiting for someone to shut up. It wasn't that. I was looking for an opening to respond.
Yeah.
And so but I love that you would hear, "Hey, hold up," as a courtesy.
Yeah.
That makes me think of the little transponder in the ear, the giraffe ears. Like you hear it gentle as opposed to something harsh.
Yeah. And of course, this is the challenge when there's communication going and you don't have the visual cues.
That's right. We're in the studio. I'm in a studio. You're at home, and we can't see each other.
Right. And so, if I was looking at your face closely while we were talking, I would probably have noticed that there was stuff going on faster. And so this is one of the reasons why we're built for face to face.
Or the palm of my hand up in front of you saying stop. Well, we are. So I've the other episodes I have are pre-recorded, and most of them were pre-COVID. But we are at this time right now when, it's so. I almost feel like I'm putting one of those things in a building when they build a building and they hide something for like 100 years, to a keystone or something to sort of mark a point in time. We're at a point in time right now. Late March 2020, where we really have no idea what the future is going to hold with this virus traveling around the world. So is there anything around listening that's pertinent to this time and place that we're in?
Well, I was speaking a little while ago about listening, the challenge of listening when we don't agree. And I actually, one of my colleagues earlier today, I spent some time with her, giving her an ear, because her family is all over the world. None of them are United States. And some of her family are really urgently calling for her to come home. And she's torn about that for many, many reasons. And she also was saying that she was kind of struggling because she's observing that many of the people around her are having pretty fixed narratives in place about what having the virus means, what safety means. And these stories are bumping into one another, because she's a young person. Many of her partner and their friends are young. And so there's very different ideas about what safe means right now for people.
That's right.
And there's even different ideas that folks have in relation to that about where the virus comes from. And basically the lack of certainty is driving us to come up with narratives to help us feel like we've got a little certainty under our feet.
I think that's I love, right, there you go, certainty. I think that this listening when there's uncertainty is one of the hardest things to do. Listening to somebody espouse a position that you agree with or that you strongly disagree with is easier than that edge of we're uncertain.
Yeah. Yeah. And listening when we don't agree is I think is happening is difficult, especially when you yourself are finding yourself low bandwidth. It's hard when you're not feeling very resilient yourself to use up your energy listening to other folks. So I find that it's useful, if you do have the support to do it when you're listening, when you're not agreeing to somebody, to listen anyway, and really, if you can give them give them an ear. Listening for what feels important to them, listening for the underlying needs and what they're saying, and asking some reflecting questions to check that your understanding matches their intention in speaking. And then, to say at the end, I appreciate you being willing to speak with me as honestly as you are right now. And, I just, for what it's worth, I don't see it the same way as
Right.
you.
So it's hard to listen it's hard to really listen when you disagree because, as you said earlier, it's easy to build a case in your head to give the contrary information, to tell your
Yeah.
point of view. But you're also bringing up the listening when your resilience is low. And I was thinking that empathy is kind of the fuel. If someone's resilient, if someone's low bandwidth, drained, that providing empathy is like fuel for them to keep going and saying more.
Yeah, it can be. It could also, when I'm realizing that I'm actually don't have the juice for a good listening, I might say to someone, I'm just noticing I'm feeling pretty tapped out right now. Can I touch base with you again? I'm going to go, take a walk or take a nap or whatever, juices me up, go pet my dog, and I'll be back. Thank God we don't have to observe social distancing from our dogs.
Oh gosh.
Gosh. So, just having I would say both the self-confidence, but also the care for the other person to acknowledge, I am not at my best listening self right now. I only want you to have my best listening self because you matter to me. So is it okay if we hit pause on this right now? And let me come back with a better set of ears on my head. Things like that, where I just acknowledge my limitations. I find being transparent and acknowledging limitations does a lot to build trust. Of all the currency in the world, for me, trust is probably up there as far as getting stuff done.
Oh, yes. So much of, as it's coming from the perspective of a psychotherapist, so much of the first meeting with people, and even later down the road, is forming an alliance, developing trust. And I know when I interview people about their past and talk to them, it's really easy for people to start talking about all the terrible things that have happened in their life. And I slow people down sometimes because I don't like to see people suffer when they don't trust the person across from them enough to really handle the thoughts and feelings that come up when they talk about very painful things from the past. So boundaries do build trust in that way.
I like that. So you're not asking them to pull out that painful material just to satisfy some idea that they have of what you're looking for.
Yeah, it's a kind of over compliance that I don't think is healthy.
Mm-hmm.
My friend Steve Benjamin talks about that in one of the episodes that's already recorded. So what's coming to your mind, Kit? I'm the host interviewing you, but I picked you because I'm interested in what you got to say on this topic. So anything coming to mind that you would like to put on the agenda?
I'm thinking about some workshops we started doing some years ago called Listening is an Act of Love and Social Change.
Being the Gandhi Institute for Nonviolence?
Right. Yeah. We being the MK Gandhi Institute. Yep. And we've had the opportunity for doing them from like staff for area organizations, student groups. And I enjoy just acknowledging to people that there can be a lot of barriers to listening. So one of the exercises that we do are to describe the barriers to good listening. And there are many, that are there. And then also to talk about remedies to some of the barriers. And some of us have been blessed with at least one person in our life who modeled good listening for us. And yet, really to find someone, especially someone who's not a professional therapist or something, who really is willing to be with us and not just sort of stand in the shallow end of the pool, but really go into, and explore in a slow, careful way, what's really often keeps us up at night. It's such a huge gift. So I just really want to acknowledge how sometimes that we need to be taught to be the kind of listener that we want to be, or the kind of listener we want to have ourselves during difficult days.
Yes. Well, I think you're saying that you felt that you were not a good listener, and you went and actively sought training to get better at it. And so all right, if we get a little nuts and bolts about it, what's available? Is it only in Rochester? Is this are there some things available for listeners who aren't local?
We're putting all of our training online right now. We don't have a Listening is an Act of Love and Social Change up yet, but we will, and we'll be recording all of them too. So at some point there'll be something there. I'm just thinking about it, because I think that listening, especially during difficult periods, is one of the greatest gifts that we can give to one another. And for me, it's been, I've had one child who's died. I've had another who's been gone from my life for some years for reasons I can't get into right now, or choose not to. And like how I have sustained myself and sustained my marriage and sustained my relationship with my son and sustained so many things. It's really been, by virtue of listeners in my life. So I'm hoping that people listening to this podcast and other things that value listening really decide to become good at it and keep learning at it. And even when we do it badly, sometimes it's one of the things that Marshall Rosenberg used to say: anything worth doing is worth doing badly. If we don't do it as well as we'd like, to keep trying, it is an important thing we can give one another.
Well, I do feel like I want to observe that you disclose some very painful personal material, and that it pretty rapidly shifts my emotional state to sadness. So it sounds like some firsthand experience of having to persevere when you're low bandwidth and not feeling particularly resilient. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I like having that to draw on when I'm with people who are feeling the same way.
I feel compelled to disclose that I haven't had such trials in my life. And I use the phrase privilege bubble, which I don't know if I made that up or someone else used it, but I do sometimes feel a little, because of the nature of the work I do in private practice, that and there's great suffering, but there isn't as much economic suffering in the people I work with. And I've kind of felt that there's a duty, maybe that's too strong a word, of those people who have suffered less to bear witness to those who've suffered more. I don't know, maybe there's a patronizing part of that, or maybe we all need to bear witness to others. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that?
I love the phrase bearing witness. A Zen teacher I hung out with a long time ago by the name of Bernie Glassman wrote a book called Bearing Witness that I really like. And I think it is an important thing that we can do for one another.
I think that when I reflecting on this, because I'm still early in this project, that bearing witness is kind of a component of listening that I am the most compelled to try to bring forward. I mean, the kind of listening that you're talking about, nonviolent communication and bringing empathy and throwing empathy towards people rather than direction, and then lending an ear to people when they're suffering is a really bearing witness, and listening is one part of that.
Mm-hmm. I think for me also it relates to, and this is where maybe checking your privilege comes in, the kind of fundamental idea that even when I know someone very well, even when I've been, as in the case of the guy down the hall, married to him for almost 30 years, that fundamentally I treat other people as mysteries. When I'm wondering or guessing what their needs are, it truly is a guess. And when I'm not guessing, that for me is a sign of my low resilience. If I start to tell myself, I know what this person needs or wants.
Yes, you don't want to artificially inject certainty when there's uncertainty.
Yeah. And I think comfort with being comfortable with uncertainty is part of what we're being asked to get good at in these days, and which is a beautiful capacity that human beings can develop. It's not our preference. Most of us really prefer to have clarity and certainty, but it's part of moving through life is that there's less and less of that, especially as you get older.
Less and less certainty.
Yeah.
And I get learning theory is coming to mind, and growth mindsets, the idea that we have to be open to what we don't know. There's a vulnerability and grappling with uncertainty. Like it's sort of in my mind, it kind of spatially feels like a muscle, that we're not necessarily born with a high capacity to keep our higher cognitive functions going in the face of uncertainty. It's easy to go to more animalistic responses of fear and threat and withdrawal or numbness, and developing the capacity to stay cognitively present when we don't know, and even bring that in, even though this guy down the hall better than anybody else in the world, you're still going to, after this interview, approach him as if it's the first time and you don't know what he's going to tell you or how he's going to be. It's a real skill, I think.
Yeah, so maybe it's a skill and maybe it's an orientation. I don't know sometimes which I would call it.
Uh-huh.
But I know that, when I think about some of that, like when you mentioned like learning theory and growth mindset, I'm thinking about reading that book Option B a couple of years ago, Sheryl Sandberg. She's talking in that about the whole idea of post-traumatic growth. And I was interested in that quite a bit for my own life trajectory reasons, and also because of the work that we do at the Institute, where we work with so many children, especially who are dealing with multi-generational issues of poverty and racism in Rochester. And the idea that having some kind of trauma in your life doesn't have to mean a life sentence, that it can mean that you become more human and more humane. I find that hopeful. I'm thinking of Father Richard Rohr also as I'm reflecting on this, who talks about that love and suffering are the two great paths to transformation in our lives, and so all of these things can invite us to move in, be deeper, be with more courageous, and listening is what enables all of those things. Listening to ourselves, listening to other people.
Well, post-traumatic growth is, I didn't read Plan B, but post-traumatic growth is turning post-traumatic stress disorder on its head and saying after adversity, there's growth. And
There can be. There doesn't have to be, right?
Right. And there's ways to do that. It's an orientation. So look for growth spots, I guess. But again, I didn't read the book. Well, thank you. Anything that, here's a funny question, since I am feeling like you're a pretty good listener. Is there anything that you said or that I said that, is there anything that you said that you hoped I would pick up on and I missed? Or is there anything you want to go back to as you're paying attention that you want to highlight?
Thanks. I live in terror of creating new shoulds in people's lives and in their minds. So I don't want anything that I've said today to create a new set of shoulds in anyone who chooses to listen to this podcast.
My chest just loosened a little bit when you said that.
I'm glad.
Oh, yeah. That is just lovely.
Yeah.
Right? Isn't that you talked about the performance of listening.
Yeah.
I think that how to listen, but it's not a performance. Certainly as the host of the show, I feel a little bit like it's a performance.
Yeah.
But that's how I love to close on that. Thank you so much for being a guest on the show. And I can't thank you enough.
Thanks, Dan. You guys, you stay healthy and take good care of yourself.
And that concludes another episode of OnListening. Again, I encourage you to visit our website, onlistening.net, and subscribe to the show. Send an email with a question, recommend a guest, recommend a topic, ask me a question. Be happy to respond. As always, or at least for now, OnListening is without commercials. I hope to continue it that way, simply for the joy of recording this. Thank you.